September 27, 2018, Northern Arabian Sea, aboard the USS Essex. The deck breathes heat like a living thing, salt spray, kerosene, and the blue-white hiss of exhaust folding into the night. A Marine in a carbon-black flight suit climbs the ladder, gloves tight, visor down. His name is Major Daniel Rhino Carter, United States Marine Corps. The helmet he carries looks less like headgear and more like a starship artifact. No visor frame, no HUD glass, just a smooth shell that will paint the world straight onto his eyes. He pauses at the top rung and listens. Not to the roar, there is always a roar at sea, but for the order inside the noise, the rhythm of turbines, the clack of tie-down chains released, the hand signals crisp as parade ground drill. Somewhere inland, far beyond the horizon's midnight edge, a target waits, a compound that thinks distance is safety. It doesn't yet know that distance has a new definition. The F-35B crouches like a blade laid flat to the whetstone, edges catching deck light. To the old hands, fighters used to look like animals, muscle, wing, and snarl. This one looks like intent. The lines are stealth angles and cooled skin, the belly stuffed with fuel and brains. Under the fuselage, doors hide weapons the way a gentleman's coat hides a knife. The jet does not promise to fight. It promises to end the question. Carter straps in. The canopy lowers with the hush of a cathedral door. The deck chief taps the side with two knuckles. Old habit, ancient blessing. Inside the cockpit, the helmet comes alive. No gauges, no clutter. The world itself climbs onto his visor. Infrared gleam, radar ghosts, satellite whispers, blue dots that are friendlies, red smudges that are not. He breathes once, not to calm himself, he's already calm, but to reset, like a machine that knows exactly what it is built to do. Lightning 1, tower green. The radio is clean, disciplined, American. Carter nudges throttle, the lift fan door opens like an armored eyelid, the nozzle rotates down, and the airplane becomes something a Wright brother would not recognize. It rises, not with drama or flame, but with a civilized certainty, hovering on a column of math. Then the nose tips forward and the jet takes the deck's wind, gathering speed, shadows ripping away beneath it as it slides into black. At 20,000 feet, the Arabian Sea is a velvet plain. Moonlight rides the wave tops. The jet's skin drinks radar. Its shape folds echoes into nothing. You see, the engineers would say, radar doesn't see airplanes. It sees reflections. The F-35 was taught to refuse, taught to curve those reflections into empty space. On Carter's visor, the coastline sharpens like a photograph emerging in a darkroom. Signals bloom, civilian towers, power lines, a radar here, another there, search patterns sweeping like lighthouse beams, and scattered between them, tiny embers, cell phones, engines, heat signatures. The system knits it all into a living map. He doesn't hunt by eye, he hunts by certainty. Most fighters start with one picture and struggle to keep it. Tonight, the jet starts with many and fuses them into truth. Off his wing, hundreds of miles away, a Navy destroyer shares Aegis tracks. Above, a tanker whispers fuel states. Satellites pour timing into his GPS like an hourglass that never empties. The airplane listens to everything and speaks only what matters. Carter has flown Hornets, flown Harriers, flown aircraft that asked for his attention like needy children. This machine does the opposite. It frees it. He crosses the beach at altitude, silent as a thought. The compound doesn't know he is here. Its radar would be happier spotting a seagull. On the ground, men with rifles step into a courtyard, then step out again, unimportant to the night, because the airplane says they are unimportant. It has already found what matters. A vehicle that moves wrong, a heat signature in a room where there should be none, a sudden burst of RF, cheap jammer, not clever enough. Lightning 1, cleared to prosecute. Words clipped. American again. Beneath him, clouds of code run their checks. Range, collateral, lines of fire. He rolls. No drama, just geometry. And the bay doors open for a breath. Metal speaks in the language of perfection. The weapon falls like a line drawn by a steady hand. There is no howl, no tracer, no announcement. A minute later, miles away, the compound exhales dust and light, and then nothing. No secondary chatter, no lucky escapee with a radio screaming into the night. The sky swallows sound, and the ground accepts a new fact. Back over water, the jet is already thinking several futures ahead. Fuel, alternates, threats that never quite were. Carter checks in, he checks out, and the Essex grows from a green rune into a ship again. The landing is a vertical ballet. The fan door opens, the nozzle dips, and the deck rises to meet him like a promise kept. When the engine spools down, the night returns to the rhythm it had before he lifted off. Steam, salt, the clink of tools. He climbs the ladder, and the helmet goes dark. On the catwalk, a young crewman from Nebraska grins the grin of a man who has seen something that makes his chest feel larger. Carter nods. He doesn't say the thing that hums in his bones. They called it a flying computer. They were right, and that's why it wins. Because tonight wasn't about speed or claws. It was about order. About taking the chaos of a continent and reducing it to a picture a single Marine could read like a page. The old fighters wrestled the sky. This one turned the sky off. For a moment, over that blank sea and sleep. On the catwalk, a young crewman from Nebraska grins the grin of a man who has seen some 2 decades earlier. Fort Worth, Texas. The air smells like cutting oil and primer paint. Sparks jump from robotic arms as if the factory itself were thinking. On a mezzanine above the line, a young engineer named Alicia Moreno leans into a whiteboard crowded with triangles and wave fronts. Her grandfather welded ships at Mare Island in '43. She welds invisibility with math. Down below, the first test airframes of a new idea, Joint Strike Fighter, begin to take shape. Ribs and spars rising like the skeleton of a fast cathedral. They laughed, of course. They always do when America tries to do something that has never been done. Too many roles, the skeptics said. Too heavy, too digital, too ambitious. One jet to land on carriers, leap from Marine decks, and sprint from Air Force runways. One brain to speak Navy, Air Force Marine, all dialects of war. The world smirked. Even some at home rolled their eyes. They saw a single engine and heard compromise. They saw a bulky fuselage and said, it will never turn. They saw the price tag and forgot what victory costs when you don't prepare. What they didn't know was that this airplane wasn't designed merely to fly. It was designed to know. Stealth was its skin, yes. Shapes that bent radar's fingers back on themselves, coatings that drank echoes, but the soul was something older and somehow newer. American systems thinking. You see, radar sees reflected pulses. Infrared sees heat. Electronic support measures hear static and whispers. Old jets made the pilot be the fusion engine, juggling clues in a storm. The F-35 reversed it. The machine did the juggling. The pilot read the truth. Alicia's team argued over antenna placement the way artists argue over light in a Rembrandt. The AESA radar didn't just search. It painted and parsed and shared. The distributed aperture system wrapped 6 infrared eyes around the jet, turning night into daylight, and the jet's metal into a ghost with sight in every direction. A high-fidelity optics system peered through weather and darkness for the telltale geometry of a threat. And all of it poured into a computer architecture that, for the first time, behaved like a quiet, relentless staff officer, gathering, correlating, ranking, and presenting only what the fight demanded. Enemies mocked the helmet. A toy, they said. A party trick. They didn't sit under it in a darkened sim bay as Alicia's teammate Samir toggled between reality layers, thermal, radar, God's eye battle space, until the very idea of inside the cockpit and outside the canopy disappeared. They didn't stand by a test bench as code pushed new tactics into silicon without a wrench turning. They didn't watch Marines hover a jet the size of a barn with ballet school balance, touch it down on a rolling deck, then roar away like a catapult had been hidden under the ocean. Critics had their lines ready. It can't dogfight. It's a single engine. It's software on wings. Irony to reversal. That's an American specialty. The truth was that dogfighting belongs to the seconds before a radar blip becomes a regret. The truth was that one engine, when it's the right engine, can carry a nation's will. And software on wings? That's what you want when the war is a network you either master or drown in.
The laughter faded, not because the critics were silenced, but because the jet started to speak for itself. In tests, over ranges, across oceans where radios spoke in numbers and the numbers told one story. The picture is clear. Of course, it wasn't easy. No legend worth telling is. The first prototypes coughed, the lines slipped, codings needed love, data needed shepherding. Concurrency, building while testing, looked messy to anyone who'd never built a miracle on schedule. But that's America's way. Make, break, learn, scale. When something cracked, it didn't mean the dream was wrong. It meant the dream was being forged. Welders in '42 knew that sound. Coders in 2009 knew it too. Failure wasn't a verdict. It was a note from the future. Do it stronger. Back at Fort Worth, Alicia walked the line in earplugs and pride. Panels met seams with the hush of well-cut velvet. Technicians in clean suits masked edges by the millimeter. In conference rooms, warfighters flew missions that hadn't happened yet, the sims pumping false storms and invented enemies into the loop until the loop hardened into muscle memory. They brought courage. America brought a system. That sentence kept showing up in briefings, as a joke at first, then as a quiet catechism. Abroad, analysts clung to old comforts. It's a Harrier in a tuxedo, one wrote. Another drew graphs of wing loading and declared victory on paper. Meanwhile, deck crews learned the new dance on amphibious assault ships, the orange wands carving arcs in salt mist as lift fans unlocked a new geometry of war. Meanwhile, Air Force instructors rewired instincts. Eyes up, trust the fusion, don't chase every ghost. Let the jet strip the ghosts away. Meanwhile, carrier sailors added a new silhouette to the long American skyline of steel at sea. What mattered most was never the bullet points. It was the feeling the first time a pilot took the helmet off and realized how much he hadn't had to think about. The space that opened in his mind where anxiety used to be. That space filled with tactics, with vision, with the calm that comes from precision. For Carter, a squadron commander would later say, it wasn't just a mission, it was a promise. A promise to the ones who flew before in the loud, hot analog wind. A promise to the ones on the ground who needed a strike that would end trouble, not start it. A promise to the country that wrote checks with sweat and patience so that, on some night years later, a Marine could take off, make the world simpler, and come home. They laughed at a flying computer. They stopped laughing the first time their radar lit nothing and their radios filled with silence. Because silence, when America builds it, is not emptiness. It is control. It is order. It is freedom, engineered. Edwards Air Force Base. Mojave noon. Heat ripples off the runway until distance looks like water. The test card reads like a mountain trail. Envelope expansion. Flutter. High AOA. Weapons separation. Captain Lyle Monk Hastings straps into an F-35A with the patience of a man who's learned that progress is loud, dull, and absolutely necessary. Out on the lakebed, engineers shade their eyes with clipboards. In the telemetry van, screens glow green and patient, like surgeons waiting on a heartbeat. They had every reason to be proud, and every reason to be humble, because this is where ideas get their knuckles skinned. On the first pull into high angle of attack, the jet talks back, buffet, then a lick of yaw it wasn't supposed to have. Monk eases off, lets the airflow settle. Copy the departure cue, a voice says in his headset, calm as a metronome. They land, they brief, they go again. That's the American way. Build, break, learn, repeat. You see, the sky has rules, and every new airplane must relearn them in its own dialect. At Patuxent River, the B and C variants chase a different grammar. Catapults, arresting wires, and the vertical ballet that makes deckhands hold their breath. On the USS Wasp, a Marine test pilot lifts the F-35B a yard, then 2, then 10 above the deck. The lift fans clutch bites. The roll posts whisper corrections. The nozzle angles, hot breath hammered flat by clever metal. The first time he slides sideways, staying level as a chessboard, the deck crew can't help it. They cheer. Later, under night lighting, the same pilot waves off because the helmet's green glow needs taming. Software devs will spend weeks taking too much and tuning it to just right. Failure? No. Feedback, disguised as difficulty. They discover other gremlins because gremlins are how the future tests your resolve. The C model's tailhook scrapes the deck like a pencil that won't take, so engineers reshape the hook's point and the way it presents to the wire. The result? Traps that make old LSOs nod. A transonic rattle near the gun port. They refine fairings until air, that ancient enemy and friend, is satisfied. An engine that decides it doesn't like a particular restart profile at altitude. The fix becomes a paragraph in a manual and a line of code that will save a pilot someday who never knows his debt. At Eglin's McKinley Climatic Lab, frost crusts the jet like sugar on steel. 40-degree F, then plus 120-degree F. Rain so hard it feels biblical. The airplane sits, breathes, spins fans, wakes screens, and tells the weather politely to step aside. At Nellis, 4 F-35s face a sky full of hostile, red air. Monk remembers the brief. Do not fight for the camera, fight for the kill. They push, silent, patient. On his visor, targets bloom and fade as the fusion engine sifts truth from noise. A bandit never knows he's been painted. Another turns the wrong way because a decoy made him believe a lie. They return to base with kills recorded and fuel to spare. The debrief is brutal because the debrief is how Americans turn victory into doctrine. Most people think testing is pass-fail, Alicia tells a new hire back in Fort Worth. It isn't. It's question-answer. Why did the hook skip? Answer. Geometry. Why did the thermal load rise too quickly in a hover on a hot day? Answer. Tweak the control law, temper the deck coding, build a checklist that respects physics and Marines. Why did the pilot miss the second emitter in the cluster? Answer. Teach the display to make the pattern obvious to a tired eye at the end of a long sortie. In conference rooms, they draw loops that look like art. Observe, orient, decide, act, and then they wire them into code so the loop turns faster than a human can blink. There were days the headlines misunderstood on purpose. Too complex. September 27th, 2018. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. The night smells like dust and cooling brick.
the kind of smell that sticks to rifles and stories. In a walled compound beyond a date grove, a sentry rubs his eyes and glances at the sky. It is empty, just a dark bowl pricked with indifferent stars. His radio crackles with the boredom of men who think dawn will arrive the way it always does, slow and forgiving. He has never met an airplane that can erase the in-between. Far offshore, the USS Essex rides a black sea. Lightning 1, cleared hot, comes the call, calm and metered, the product of 100 systems agreeing on the same truth. Major Daniel Rhino Carter tips his F-35B a few degrees and watches the picture sharpen on his visor. You see, most jets look out and then guess. Tonight the jet looks and then knows. The radar paints faint geometry, corners, roof lines, a telltale metal seam beneath a tarp. The infrared eyes sip heat. One engine still ticking warm, 3 bodies moving with the slow cadence of confidence. Electronic whispers trace a handheld jammer as it blinks a pattern that worked on yesterday's drones and will not work on this. On a ridgeline miles away, an American JTAC lies prone behind a thermal scope. He is the human promise at the edge of the machine, steady breath, thumb poised over a laser that will never need to fire. His tablet shows the same composite map Carter sees. Red icons, blue friendlies, no-fly bubbles wrapped around mosques and courtyards where children sleep. Target verified, pattern clear, execute, he says, and the words ride a lattice of satellites and radios to a pilot whose grandparents might have listened to War on the Kitchen Philco. This is how America fights, men and women linked by mathematics, each respecting the other's burden. The bay doors open for a blink. A precision weapon slips out and hurries toward a destiny it does not question. There is no arc to follow with your eyes, no shriek. Just a clean line through the night, guided by coordinates so exact they feel like address numbers on a mailbox. In the compound, the sentry hears nothing. He touches the radio again as if volume could make safety. Then the courtyard blooms, not with rage, but with decision. A wall collapses inward, as if it never belonged there. A pickup that carried too many secrets exhales flame and then stops having opinions. And then, the important part, silence. No wandering fragments, no secondary nightmare. The jet circles once, twice, like an author finishing a sentence and checking the period. Effect achieved, the JTAC says. It is a bland phrase for a moral act. Strike what threatens, preserve what does not. Back on the Essex, a watch officer marks the time and nods to no one. The ship keeps moving. In a tactical cell ashore, analysts look at the feed and stare at the absence where a network node used to be. They had expected a fuss, radar panic, searchlights, men firing into the dark because that is what fear does. Instead, their screens stay quiet. A commander frowns. He has learned something he does not yet have words for. The sky can be turned off. Across the border, far from Hellman's Groves, another lesson ripples outward. In a cramped room with tired wallpaper, a cluster of hostile technicians scrub through raw radar logs. They find nothing of comfort, just ground clutter and a passing heron. It was high, one mutters. It was slow, says another. The senior man says nothing at all, because he has seen this once before in a grainy briefing about a different American airplane with a different name. He remembers the moral from that film, the way the narrator's voice carried weight. They brought courage. America brought a system. He isn't ready to say it aloud, but he feels it like a pressure under the ribs. Carter points the jet seaward and listens to the calm hum inside his headset. Tanker arcs, surface winds, a destroyer's rhythmic self-report. The helmet overlays a ghost-white path home, as if a careful hand has chalked a line across black water. Off his nose, a friendly foreship of older fighters moves like shadows returning to starlight. They never knew the target as he knew it. They didn't need to. The F-35 had already gathered, filtered, and shared enough truth that their job tonight was to be ready, not to be busy. In a world that used to reward frantic motion, that is, the quiet revolution, the machine gives time back to the human. At the debrief, there is no chest thumping. There is a clock, a map, and a calm voice walking the team through the kill chain the way a conductor might explain a score. Theme, counterpoint, resolution. The JTAC describes seeing the threat's RF fingerprint wink and then die. An Intel Marine taps a screen and shows how the compound's messaging traffic dropped from a river to a trickle in under 30 minutes. A maintainer with grease on his wrist grins at a sustainment page that reads, "Green across the board." This, too, is combat, the moment when 100 ordinary excellences add up to something enemies call unfair. What they didn't know, what they could not have known, was that this was only the visible tip of a larger certainty forming under their feet. The airplane is not a platform. It is a neighborhood. It teaches older jets new tricks by lending them sight. It gives destroyers inland vision and lets submarines have a say in the air war. It turns dispersed American power into a choir that sings from the same sheet. And when that choir performs, the world doesn't hear a song. It hears silence where alarms should be. "Major," someone asks Carter as the room empties. "How'd it feel?" He thinks about the long transit, the exact strike, the easy fuel state, the way the helmet never overloaded him, the way the jet never made him beg for information. "It felt simple," he says, which is another bland word for another moral truth. Complexity, disciplined and harnessed, becomes American simplicity. They laughed at a flying computer. They expected gimmickry, a glow stick trick for air shows. Instead, a Marine slid across a border in the dark, pressed a button, and changed a map without waking a city. That's not showmanship. That's stewardship. And for a generation raised on stories of loud victory, there is something almost sacred about winning with a whisper. Dawn over Fort Worth doesn't look like a battlefield, but it sounds like victory in slow motion. Doors roll up, composites whisper under vacuum bags, torque wrenches click with priestly certainty. On a mezzanine catwalk, Alicia Moreno watches a fuselage half-shell float along a track as if a river were carrying it. You see, one jet is impressive, a line that can breathe jets on command. That is power. The enemy can count airplanes. What they struggle to count is rhythm. America has a memory for rhythm. Willow Run stamped bombers like clockwork in '44. Today, synchronized supply chains move titanium, RAM coatings, processors, and actuators through a maze that looks chaotic until you notice it never actually stops. Workers in Texas seat sensors with hands steady enough to be surgeons. In Marietta, wings arrive that have already been interrogated by lasers to the 1,000th. In Cameri and Nagoya, allied factories speak the same language. Fixtures that match. Tolerances that respect the same God. Precision. Critics abroad talk about numbers as if numbers were static. But American industry knows numbers are a flow. Inputs, outputs, spares, upgrades, training hours, measured not just in tons, but in confidence. The old way built planes and shipped manuals. The new way builds ecosystems. Engines roll through Pratt's bays like cathedral organs waiting for their music. Radar arrays leave clean rooms, zipped like crown jewels, and meet software drops that have already practiced with their twin in a digital twin world. Virtual sorties flown by models that fail so pilots won't. The sustainment backbone clicks into place. Depots in the States and abroad, parts pools that make a squadron commander relax his shoulders, predictive maintenance that hears a bearings complaint before a human ear can. They brought courage. America brought logistics, fast, quiet, relentless. On a wind-scuffed tarmac in Vermont, a guard crew finishes a phase inspection. The crew chief, an Iraq vet whose knees complain when it rains, taps a tablet and grins. The system has already ordered the part. No phone calls, no fingers crossed. The jet is a citizen of a network that treats downtime like an insult. In Beaufort, young Marines study in a classroom where the cockpit lives on a wall. In Lemoore, carrier pilots fold F-35Cs into a dance learned first in Sims and then at sea, catapult steams curling like signatures on a contract between generations. Across the Atlantic, RAF and RNLAF pilots climb the same ladders into the same kind of sky and speak tactics that match American cadence. Because interoperability isn't a slogan, it's a checklist you can pass, fail, and pass again until it's muscle. Software, once a pamphlet stapled to a machine, is now the bloodstream. The jet's brain doesn't age in months. It ages in minutes, then renews. New electronic warfare libraries arrive like fresh maps. Threat rings shift. The airplane learns a new way to make them irrelevant. Most people think hardware wins wars, Alicia tells a visiting delegation, pointing to a wall of mission data loads. Hardware survives long enough for software to win wars. She says it with a smile, because somewhere in a lab an adversary is copying yesterday's trick while America is rehearsing tomorrow's. On the ocean, the system grows wider still. A Burke-class destroyer stares into weather and sees farther because a flight of F-35s is out there knitting the air with truth. A carrier's air wing fights older and younger together, rhinos with teeth sharper because Lightning IIs lend them sight. Amphibious ready groups discover what happens when Marines bring an eye that can sprint, hover, and hover again. Submarines, ghosts with patience, feed the picture from beneath. Space assets pour timing and targets down like rain. AWACS and ground stations append context until a commander's decision space stretches from seconds to minutes, the most precious gift in any fight. Enemies still cling to old comforts. They buy show muscles, parade missiles, air show climbs, brags measured in raw thrust. They'll bring courage. They always do. But America will bring a system, kill chains that you cannot see, logistics that do not sleep, allies who train until the accents blur and only procedures remain. That's the difference between building a weapon and building a way of war. A weapon wins a duel. A way of war wins a decade. At a depot in Utah, a composite panel rests on a cradle while a technician lays down RAM like a painter touching up the skin of a legend. In a software vault, a pair of programmers who grew up on stories of Midway argue about a line of code that will decide whether a symbol blinks once or twice when a threat emitter pulses in a peculiar rhythm. No one will notice, someone says. The pilot will, Alicia answers. That is the culture, thousands of small respects adding up to a single large respect. For the man or woman who will strap in and trust the machine with their life and their country's intent. And industry, American industry, answers with scale. When the need is more jets, the line stretches its stride. When the need is more range, the tanker fleet flexes. When the need is distributed operations across tiny islands or rough strips, expeditionary gear and tactics meet the moment. The bureaucracy can grumble. The process can creak. But beneath all that, the pulse is steady. Weld, wire, test, deliver, sustain. The same pulse that built Liberty ships now builds sensor fusion. The same spirit that riveted aluminum now writes code. It isn't nostalgia. It is lineage. One afternoon, Alicia stands on a balcony as a newly painted jet taxis toward its first flight. The sun catches the edges and turns them softer, like a predator smoothing its fur. She thinks of her grandfather at Mare Island, of the Liberty ships he sent down the ways with a hammer's blessing. Different century, same vow. Build it right, build it fast, build it to last, and build the system around it so it never fights alone. The jet rotates, lifts, and climbs into the blue with unhurried authority. Somewhere, an adversary analyst will count it as 1. Alicia smiles. He is wrong by a factor of a nation. Night again, but a different night. Quieter, deeper. The kind of darkness that belongs to oceans and men who have earned their sleep. What they didn't know, what no one can really know until it happens, is how quickly a nation's mood can change when its warriors return from a mission not rattled, but rested. In squadron bars where ghosts of old squadrons still sit, the stories shift. There is pride, yes, but also gratitude, for maintainers whose smart diagnostics turned maybe into go, for programmers whose late-night build made a symbol clearer at the edge of fatigue, for ship crews who treated the ocean's temper as a puzzle and solved it. The lesson is an old one taught anew. Courage is precious, but systems make sure courage isn't squandered. The philosophers in uniform call it decision dominance. The elders call it having the drop. Alicia's grandfather would have called it doing it right. Choose your phrase, the heart is the same. America's genius is not just the thing it builds, it's the way it arranges things. Tankers that show up on time, satellites that tell the truth, allies who train until their procedures are indistinguishable from ours. An airplane that hears everything, says only what matters, and leaves a pilot with enough mind left over to be human. There will be new threats. There always are. Hypersonic this, directed energy that, swarms and counter-swarms like angry weather. Fine. America has a habit of meeting storms with better instruments. Somewhere right now, under fluorescent lights in the honest silence between test runs, someone is tuning a line of code that will save a life in 2029. Somewhere a sailor is learning a checklist that her grandmother would recognize in spirit if not in syntax. Somewhere a little boy is standing in that museum, looking at the helmet behind glass and feeling the first spark of a calling. This is how free nations renew themselves, not with slogans, with work. Carter writes his final note in the debrief and signs his name. He thinks of the men who flew noisy, leaky, heroic machines over Europe and the Pacific, who brought courage because that was all there was to bring. He thinks of the industrial armies who made parts by the million, so those men could fly again the next day. He thinks of Alicia, whom he's never met, and all the Alicias who turned the sky into something you can organize. He thinks of the crew chief who grinned when the tablet ordered its own parts, of the JTAC whose voice never wavered, of the destroyer that watched the coast with him, a partner he could not see but trusted anyway. Then he closes the book and lets the silence have the room. They laughed at a flying computer. Then a Marine lifted off a black deck, crossed a black sea, and turned the sky off. That's not a trick. That's a nation deciding that freedom deserves instruments worthy of its name. They brought myths. We brought math. And somewhere in the quiet after mission complete, with the ocean breathing and the hangar lights humming, freedom took a breath of its own.